Welcome to the Rhetorical Rumble, episode 4. Today we're talking about Trump and Biden, our most likely presidential candidates by the time this releases. And so here with me today, representing Joseph Biden, we have Noah Diamont. And here with me today, representing Donald Trump, we have my father, Dr. David James Smith, MD. Feel free to say hi. Shout out anything you want real quick.
Noah, good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Excited. It's nice to see everybody grown up, all you guys grown up. It's wonderful. I'm looking forward to a nice, friendly conversation, debate, and I love to see young minds. I'm honored to be here.
Good.
Likewise.
I'm glad everyone's here. I'm glad everyone is excited to be here. To go over some specific rules for this debate that people at home might need to know. We are not going to be using what I call whataboutisms. So while we're talking about Trump, we're talking about Trump. We're not going to say, what about Biden's mental state, right? We have an hour to talk about Biden's mental state if we want to, and vice versa. We're not going to talk about Trump at all, and his court cases or whatever. When we're talking about Biden. And then on top of that, we're only talking about Trump and Biden. I don't care what Hunter Biden did. I don't care what all of Donald Trump's children did. They are not running for president, so I don't care. Besides that, let's get right into it. We are going to start with Joseph Biden, and Noah Diamont is going to do his first opener, to give us our first opener.
Okay, great. I'll try to make this quick, just so we can get to the back and forth quicker. But I think Joe Biden is the obvious, clear, best option for president. He has had a long record of multiple successes as president, outshining his competitor. These include legislation such as the American Rescue Plan, Inflation Reduction Act, Infrastructure and Investment, Jobs Act, CHIPS Act, increasing gun safety, particularly focusing on tracking down illegally acquired guns, Respect for Marriage Act, protecting same-sex marriages in case the Obergefell ruling is overturned. He has seen significant real wage growth over the last 2 years of his presidency. That means that wages have grown faster than inflation. And he has seen significant energy independence, far surpassing the prior administration, and has cut the deficit from the prior administration. Among those accomplishments, I believe it is clear that he should be the chosen candidate, and I turn over my stand.
All right, Dad.
That's what I saw. All right. Well, hi, I'm David James Smith, and I'm a physician in San Diego. And I think President Trump is a clear Republican nominee. And as you can see, Joe Biden still has some Democratic competition. And Donald Trump has Nikki Haley. Under Donald Trump, we had lowest inflation, and we had job growth that was significant, and we were energy independent. We actually exported energy for the first time in like 20 or 30 years. Under Donald Trump, we had a secure southern border and a secure northern border. We did not have 8 million illegal migrants crossing from 120 countries as we do under President Biden. Under Donald Trump, we had a president that was intellectually cogent. Unfortunately, Joe Biden has either Parkinson's or advancing senile dementia. It's not just the Republicans who feel this way. Many of the Democrats within his own party do. Unfortunately, Joe Biden will be the oldest living president to be reelected if he is reelected, and I don't believe he can make it for another 4 years. I don't think that his cerebral activity or cognitive abilities will allow that. So Joe Biden is not the clear nominee. President Trump is a clear nominee, and one can only surmise by the way the Democrats are trying to indict and put him in jail, that Donald Trump is a threat to the Democratic Party like no other Republican nominee. And so I think given these factors, low inflation, huge job growth, energy independence, and cognitive lucency, President Trump is a clear nominee.
All right, you're free to go in the back and forth. Bring up whatever you want. We're talking about Biden right now, so just focus on Joseph Biden.
Well, let me ask you, I want to ask you a question for you is, do you think that Joe Biden is cognitively impaired, and do you think that Joe Biden has the mental capacity to last another 4 years?
Well, I think he definitely has the mental capacity to last another 4 years. I think he's an old man, just like his competitor would be the oldest president ever if he's reelected. They're both old, and Biden has, he's proven to have a successful first term, passing many extensive legislation, getting bipartisan legislation passed, reaching across the aisle more than most presidents ever would, far more than Trump. Trump is currently trying to, well, we'll get into that later. We'll get into the indictments and Trump's action. But no, I don't think there's evidence that Biden has Parkinson's or dementia, but he's not what he used to be 50 years ago, and neither is anyone at that age. And I think that's fine, and I think he's going to continue to pass very good legislation.
So, Noah, are you comfortable with Joe Biden not being the one that's really running, but that his surrogates within the White House and the administration are the ones that are making the decision? Because it's clear when Joe Biden falls repetitively and forgets or names dead presidents or prime ministers as though they're actively living, don't you think that shakes the confidence in the American people that this individual does not have the cognitive ability? I mean, honestly, you're mixing up the president of Mexico with the dead president of Egypt or the president of Egypt. I think most Americans look at that and they take pause and say, wait a minute, the guy's almost 82 years old. Maybe he probably was cognitively lucid 20, 30 years ago, but perhaps now he's not. I'm just asking you, do you not find that a little bit concerning? Because I think 86% of Americans on many polls do, Republicans and Democrats.
I do not find that specifically very concerning. I think there's a lot of names presidents are required to know, and occasionally you're going to mix names up. And as long as you're not doubling down on that, I don't think that's that big of a problem. And I think you'll find that many presidents make similar mistakes as that. And I don't think it's gotten in the way of Biden pursuing his domestic and foreign policy agenda, which has been promoting infrastructure, education, health, CHIPS Act, and all the meanwhile supporting our international orders like NATO and strengthening them. And those are all things that mixing up a few names has not slowed down whatsoever.
So let me ask you this then. If you think his foreign policy is so good, why do people of his own party say every foreign policy decision that he's made in the last 50 years has been wrong? That was made by, I think, Barack Obama's Secretary of State. And the other issue is, why do you think if his foreign policy is so good that under his tutelage, President Obama's, Hamas invaded Israel, slaughtered 1,200 Jews, took 300 plus hostages, and President Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, and that China is threatening Taiwan, where under President Trump, none of these threats existed. Do you feel confident that President Biden really has the ability to enforce foreign policy? Or again, I'm going to circle back, is this then a puppet being led by his surrogates in the White House?
I think it's ridiculous to infer that any part of Biden's presidency encouraged, promoted, or allowed the incursion of Hamas into Israel, resulting in many individuals being killed, or Putin's invasion unprompted, without any reason, invasion of Ukraine. I don't think Biden has any responsibility for that. And I think Biden has, in fact, been a extremely strong leader in promoting the international order to support Ukraine against Russia, one of our greatest adversaries, without having to put a single U.S. soldier on the ground there. And that has been a huge accomplishment of his, is uniting NATO, uniting the global support of Ukraine, allowing and supporting Ukraine to not only preserve its democracy and independence, but greatly weaken one of our greatest adversaries in Russia and Putin.
Okay, so if you believe that, why did Biden prohibit the sale of the F-14s to the Ukrainians to actively take on Russia? If what you say is true, if Biden really wanted to deter the adversarial Putin aggressive regime, why did he deny those sales of the F-14s to Ukraine? How can you reconcile those two facts?
I'm not sure exactly what specific sale you're referring to. What I do know as a fact is the Democratic Party...
The F-14 fighter jets.
Okay, well, the Democratic Party under Joe Biden's leadership has pushed and successfully passed significant support in arms sales to and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, and helped unite other countries to do the same. You can say there's these specific jets that he didn't sell to Ukraine. Well, I mean, I don't think that's that big of an issue when Biden's opposition, the Republican Party, has attempted to cut aid to Ukraine and hold up aid to Ukraine. Biden alone and the Democratic Party under Biden is the leading force in pushing for more aid for Ukraine. And that is something that is necessary.
Although I don't agree with that, the Republicans didn't undercut that. The Republicans just tried to tie border security to the Israel and Ukraine package. And then under Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, of course, that package was dead on arrival with the new House Speaker. I think it's Johnson. And so, again, they are trying to pass a new bill to Ukraine, with or without Israel, I'm not sure. And Johnson said, without border security, it's not going to pass. Don't you think that that's a reasonable negotiating tool within the politics of America, a bicameral House, that the Republicans want border security, real border security, not just processing and catch and release, but stay in Mexico and tighter border security in order to satisfy President Biden's request for more aid to Israel and Ukraine? Surely, do you not agree that that's a reasonable negotiating point?
If that was an honest negotiating point, that is true. But as we've seen, the Republicans have shown their extreme dishonesty on this issue, as even a few honest Republicans have come out and said, we asked for this. The Democrats and Biden have agreed to work with us on this, and they've put forward the most conservative bipartisan bill ever that would give Biden the ability to, and the requirement at certain levels, to actually shut down the border and essentially all crossings in. But Trump has, I know we shouldn't talk about Trump, but the Republicans have held this up. And it's very clear who's influencing them to do that and why. It's a political move. Democrats in good faith have come up with a conservative bill to promote border security, but Republicans are now going back on their promise and saying, nope, it's an election year. We don't want to give Biden a win.
And I guess I don't agree with that, because the bill allowed for up to 5,000 illegal crossings a day. I'm not sure how that's border security. And also, it took 60 votes in the Senate to get that bill passed. They didn't even have enough votes to get it through the Senate, let alone to the House, which has a slim majority. So I have to disagree with you. I don't think the bill was good. It didn't do anything for border security. It didn't have the Remain in Mexico provisions, which the Republicans in the House wanted. And so I can't blame them for being a DOA on arrival. But I guess that gets back to this whole thing. They, meaning the House, said, we need to have border security with aid to Israel and Ukraine. And the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and Chuck Schumer came up with a bill that didn't provide that, and yet and did not enforce the stay in Mexico provision and allowed 5,000 a day before the border would be shut down. I mean, how silly is that? 5,000 illegal migrants can come across before you shut the border down. So I guess my question to you is, again, you're okay with having 5,000 illegal migrants from 120 come across the border a day, and yet not have them remain in Mexico? And do you not worry about the terrorist threat of some of those illegals coming over from countries that hate us?
That's first of all not what the bill says. The 5,000 number comes from the bill provision that would institute a mandatory shutdown of the border, regardless of what anyone says. If there's a average of 5,000 crossings for 7 days, now that's a mandatory requirement. There are tons of pieces of the bill that increase border security. They're not related to that 5,000 individual requirement. There's lower requirements that give the president greater authority to shut down the border. That's permissive authority, not required. And additionally, it puts a lot more resources to border security to, first of all, remove undocumented immigrants that crossed illegally and do not have legitimate asylum claims, as well as promoting more efficiency in asylum processing. All extremely important things to make sure that people who are crossing actually have legitimate claims to be here versus not legitimate claims to be here.
So you're okay with 5,000 a day for 7 days before the border is mandatory closed? That's question number one. Question number two, those are the only ones that the Border Patrol, the Border Patrol and DHS know about. What about all the tens of thousands that come through the drug cartels, along with the human trafficking and the fentanyl? I mean, Biden's open border policy has led to hundreds of thousands of deaths of American citizens from fentanyl overdose poisoning. I just don't understand how that bill, it didn't address any of that, and it didn't address any of the illegals that are not processed through California Border Patrol or Department of Homeland Security. How do you respond to the mothers and the fathers of the children that died from fentanyl overdoses from the drug cartels, and the drug cartels making millions of dollars of illegal human trafficking and not going through the proper processing of the 5,000 per day for 7 days, as you said? How do you respond to that?
I mean, the 5,000 number is a hard stop number. That's a significant would be a significant new part of immigration, which we haven't had in this country before. It's a radical change, and it'll be interesting to see how that impacts things. It's something we haven't experienced before.
So you guys are both probably missing each other about something. Dad, you're saying it's 5,000 illegals. Noah, are you saying it's 5,000 total immigrants that try to cross the border? And not just illegals, or no?
No, that's for undocumented encounters is the 5,000 number.
Awesome.
That's legal. That's an illegal migrant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a huge change to our previous policy. This is something that we didn't have under previous presidencies, conservative or liberal. And so trying to frame this number as wow, you're allowing 5,000 in, that's not the case. This is a new type of restriction we haven't had before. This is significant. That's one part. And two, this idea that the Biden administration has an open border policy is just simply not true. Border Patrol under Biden has had more encounters, a higher percentage of undocumented immigrants, and has also deported a higher percentage of undocumented immigrants than in the previous administration. This is an administration that takes border security very seriously. There are undocumented immigrants that cross the border under every administration, and some bad things happen, and it's horrible, and that's not a justification of this. But this argument that there's an open border policy under the Biden administration just simply isn't true, when he is actually deporting a higher rate of undocumented immigrants that the country is encountering than the previous administration is. It clearly shows that border security is is a priority of the Biden administration, and Biden has said if he gets the authority from this new bill that's been proposed, that he will shut down the border when the numbers, which would be under 5,000, allow the president to permissively shut down the border.
Yeah, if I lower the dam and more salmon jump over the height of the dam, that doesn't mean that I'm doing more to stop salmon jumping over the height of the dam. That just means I lowered the resistance for them to make that jump. That's what your argument basically says as far as the permissibility. The other thing is some people are drug cartels, and the mothers and fathers of some people have lost their children to fentanyl. And so I find it just difficult to reconcile in my conservative mind why you think Joe Biden has done more than President Trump, with, by the way, he didn't need a $5,000 rule or 5,000 migrant rule, because he didn't have 5,000 coming across today because they had tight border security. So Joe Biden creates a problem, lowers the dam, lets more people in, and then said, there's a problem, but I need 120 billion or whatever it is to do more, but I'm not going to raise the dam. I'm just going to process them faster. I'm not going to remain in Mexico. I'm going to let them go, and they don't show up for their court date. So you and I are not going to reconcile that. I just think it's interesting how we see this so differently between two people. Noah, let me ask you one other question about President Biden, if I may. Do you believe that his ability? I'm going to go back to my first salvo with you. And I just ask you, I mean, do you not worry that he does not have the cognitive ability to control the nuclear codes and to make cogent foreign policy decisions with aggression in China and Russia and Iran? And I'm going to specifically ask you about the proxies in Iran. And what do you think about him hitting those targets in Houthi and the Houthi targets? And why doesn't he hit the Iranian infrastructure? So what do you think of that?
Okay, but before I move on, I just want to speak to some of the points that were brought up in closing on the discussion of the border. The dam has not been lowered. That is just simply not true. Biden has taken very seriously border security. It's simply not true that there's an open border policy, that undocumented immigrants are flocking over the border. This has just been proven not to be true, and the fact that Biden has clearly stated on the record he is willing to implement authority given to him by Congress to further slow down crossings over the border shows how serious he is about this. The Biden administration has put significant resources into the Border Patrol. He has rebuilt infrastructure of select border barriers that have fallen apart or need rebuilding, and he continues to not catch and release, but deport more undocumented immigrants than Trump did. Those are the facts. And this idea that there's an open border policy under the Biden administration is just simply not true. Going to his cognitive ability, I don't think we've seen any reason to believe that he cannot adequately confront the perils internationally that we face. He has been very strong on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He was objectively the leading force in the international order to unite the world to support Ukraine against Putin. He has pushed other countries to contribute more resources than previously were willing to support Ukraine and help weaken our enemy in Russia. I just have not seen any reason to believe that he does not have the mental ability to continue to do that as he has already done. As far as attacks on the Houthi terrorists, I think they've been well thought out, well planned, and well executed, and well deserving. I think that directly targeting Iran would be a much bigger problem and much different because Iran has not directly targeted us. And strikes directly against Iran would much more likely lead to a huge regional war than strikes against actual terrorist organizations, which I support.
So if you can attack the Houthi terrorists with multiple strikes, but that has not deterred them from hitting ships going through, I believe, the is it the Gulf of Persia, I believe, or the Straits of Hormuz? I'm sorry, or Hormuz, Straits of Hormuz. It's ineffective, and it has not stopped them. Indeed, just last week they vowed to continue to increase their attacks because they have lots of oil money from Iran. Why did President Biden give Iran the ability to get more oil? I think it's something like $40 billion, maybe 20 or $40 billion. And what signal does that send to the rest of the free world that Joe Biden will allow Iran to gain strength through oil sales so that they can fund their terrorist organization, not just a Houthi, but also Hezbollah in Lebanon? And do you find that at all disturbing that Joe Biden would allow Iran to continue with the ability to get more money so that they can fund their global terrorist network? I don't believe you disagree that Iran funds a global terrorist network, not only the Houthi, but also Hezbollah and other organizations. Why does Joe Biden continue to enable Iran and coddle them?
I agree Iran has significant issues in their funding and support of terrorist organizations around the globe. What I don't agree with is that Biden has coddled Iran. As far as allowing Iran to make more money through oil sales, I'm not sure what numbers we're talking about, what we're talking about there, and to what extent that Biden has the authority to allow or disallow Iran to sell oil. I do not think Biden is responsible for Iran's terror network. I do think Biden has been a party to, and the Obama administration, which created a significant policy an agreement to limit Iran's ability to acquire nuclear weapons, which I think was a wonderful international policy move under the Obama administration that Biden did support and would support if that same deal could be renewed, which won't be. And I think that was one of the best ways to limit Iran's influence. And unfortunately, we can no longer have that deal. But the ability to have international individuals within Iran's weapons facilities to ensure that they were not developing more stronger weapons was a significant way to limit Iran's ability to further cause terror around the world. I'm not as concerned with their sale of oil.
But their sale of oil is what funds their ability to fund continued clandestine operations of their nuclear program, which I think is occurring. And I think that many within even Biden's administration and moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats, so-called blue blood Democrats, feel is occurring. But let me shift and ask you something about Biden economic policy. Because under Trump, their inflation was at the Fed rates of 2%, 1.92%. And Biden takes office, and within 18 months, inflation is at a 60-year high. Indeed, I remember, because I'm old, I remember that in the 70s, inflation was at 19%. Under Biden, it got up to 9, 10, 11%. And now prices are 20, 22% higher in the CPI index. That excludes energy, and I think one other thing, gas, energy, and something else I can't recall. But I mean, that's even higher. So Americans and wage growth that you said was so good under Biden, but I have to just be disrespectful and say that wage growth has not kept up with inflation. Real wage growth compared to inflation since Biden took office is down by 4.6 or 5%, meaning that if you had $10, you are now your wage growth is $6.40 or $6.60 less than it was. And so I have to ask you, Noah, how do you really think that Biden has done on the economy? Because most Americans, and finally, I will say one last fact, credit card debt is at an all-time high of 1.3 or 1.4 trillion, which is usually a harbinger of a major recession that's about to occur. So to recap and to summarize, the Fed rate is at the highest it's been in 60 years. Inflation is the highest it's been in 60 years. Even the January CPI still put it up at 3 point something percent. And Americans are earning 4.6 to 4.2% less than they did under Trump. So how can you really argue effectively or debate me and say that Biden's economic policy is good for Americans?
Well, I will speak to the inflation peak, which was around 9% earlier in Biden's presidency, which was very high. And I think it's reasonable to attribute that to an economic recovery coming out of the pandemic, when there was significant stimulus to allow the jumpstart the economy back into full production. That massive amount of money, which allowed people to support themselves as we were bringing the unemployment rate down, did result in significant inflation. But since that peak of 9%, inflation has been dropping quickly. The inflation rate has dropped from that peak of 9% down to 3.1%, and shows signs of continuing to go down. And the current trajectory indicates it'll be 2% or lower by the end of the year. That's very significant. Meanwhile, wage growth has increased. At the time when inflation was at 9%, yes, that was outpacing wage growth, but that has reversed. As inflation has come down, wage growth has surpassed inflation. And that continues to be the case in the trends. The trends continue to indicate inflation going down, wage growth going up. And that is that shows a trajectory of the Biden economy. First of all, coming out of the COVID pandemic, jumpstarting the economy, and now working on solidifying that economy by reducing inflation, increasing wage growth, and further reducing the unemployment rate to historic lows. And along with energy, which was brought up, yes, we achieved initial energy independence under Trump, but currently energy independence under Biden is far higher than what was achieved under Trump. And we will continue to produce and export more energy than we bring in, which is good for our economy and good for the rest of the world too.
Oh, I have to say that Trump had energy independence and Biden does not.
We do.
Okay. I will say this, that Biden canceled a lot of the domestic leases on liquefied natural gas production that we could use to export to Germany and to Western Europe to decrease their dependence on Putin and Russia. And yet he canceled those. And I don't know why you think that we do have energy independence, because we're importing now oil more than we are exporting. So I don't agree with that statement, but I have to say Powell has stated unequivocally that interest rates are not going to go down now because of inflation. And I certainly don't think that inflation, that the wages of the American people, and I don't think they feel that, has surpassed their inflationary costs. I know I don't feel that, and I work very hard, but I just don't see how you can argue that the wage growth has surpassed the inflation. I don't know where you get your facts from. Under Trump, the CPI was 1.9 to 2.2. Trump, under Biden, it was 9% for the first 18 months. Gas prices, which are excluded from the CPI, were almost $6 a gallon in the western states like California, because of our gas tax laws. And so I find it incredulous that you argue that point, because I just don't see how you can make that that kind of a argument. So I don't believe that we are energy independent. I'd like you to tell me how you believe we're energy independent now under Biden.
Okay, well, for anyone watching, you can feel free to look up the numbers. You'll find that at the end of the Trump presidency, our net export rate was 3.48 quads, significant net export rate indicating energy independence. But under Biden, we have achieved the numbers as of 2022 were net exports of 5.94 quads, far surpassing the peak of Trump's net exports. We are clearly continue to be energy independent, and anyone who wants to look up the export numbers will find that to be true. As far as wages and inflation, I think that, yes, we did have higher gas prices coming out of the COVID pandemic. That can significant amounts of those numbers can be attributed to gasoline production having slowed down during the pandemic as less people were driving and less gasoline was being consumed, requiring less production. And all of a sudden, you come out of the COVID-19 pandemic and demand shoots up, but supply is artificially low because of the pandemic, caused significant shortages and increased prices. But as gasoline production has increased, you've seen those prices come way down. And similarly to inflation, which went up very high coming out of the pandemic, it is spiraling downwards. The Fed rate, I haven't heard that it's no longer going to be cut. We've had recent cuts to it. From my understanding, all indicators point to continued cuts to the Fed rate. And that shows a strong, stable economy.
Noah, Powell just came out in the last couple of weeks saying there's no Fed cut rate. They're not cutting rates right now. And now nobody thinks rates are going to come down, if they are going to come down, until the third or fourth quarter of 2024. And that's just a fact that any of the people watching this podcast can look up for themselves. It's just not happening because inflation remains persistently high. I do agree job growth is low, and job growth was low under Trump. But when you lose 3 or 4 million jobs under the pandemic, or 10 or 12, I don't know what it was, you should expect some job growth once the pandemic is resolved and people go back to work. But I just don't understand. I guess my question is, if Biden is doing so good at the economy, why do so many Americans, Democrat and Republican polls, it's 76%, say he's doing a poor job in the economy? And why do so many polls say that he's not cognitively fit to be president for another 4 years? This is not just Republicans. This is independents and moderate Democrats. And I guess my question is, when you deny the obvious on so many fronts, I just don't understand. I guess I don't understand where. I can't even get a recall of an agreement from you.
And I hear what you're saying. I continue to reaffirm that I think the numbers speak for themselves. I'm not as concerned with public opinion, what someone in a poll has to say about the economy. I'm concerned with the numbers. The numbers show clear trends. I think it's very common to see public opinion not keeping directly up with economic indicators, but following economic indicators a few months behind. I think you're going to see, and have already seen, some changes in the polling. Biden has started to see an uptick in his polling numbers. It's been small, but it's been there, and I think you'll see that change continue to follow the strong economic indicators of the last few months. Like I said, there was high inflation earlier in Biden's presidency. Inflation numbers are going down. Real wage growth is going up. And I think you'll see the polling numbers follow that. Now, we may see closer to the election that the poll numbers haven't followed that, but my prediction is they will. And I don't expect people to feel these economic indicators the first few months they come out. But as we continue to see them month after month after month, a year in, people are going to feel that more. That's my prediction, at least. And I think that's going to be reflected in the polls and people's willingness to vote.
It's certainly going to be a very interesting election year. I think we both can agree on that. How do you feel about Kamala Harris if should Biden become incapacitated from a stroke or an untimely death or a terminal diagnosis? How do you feel about her running the executive branch of the government? Are you confident in her abilities? And I only would say I give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but I just don't think she's ready for prime time.
I'm gonna cut you off. We're not gonna talk about Kamala Harris. Just like, well, Trump hasn't picked a VP, but we wouldn't talk about his VP either. We're just gonna talk about Biden and his policies right now.
Okay, she is the vice president, so I thought part of the administration was fair game. But okay, let me just redirect then. I can certainly redirect. Let's talk about some domestic decisions that Biden has made in regards to energy. What do you think, Noah, about the limit on gas stoves and the regulations on refrigerators? I think he put them on, and washers and dryers that are going to end up costing the American consumers up to $750 more per purchase. I mean, do you think that that's a good thing to do, or do you think maybe that should be put aside for now and revisited later based upon inflation, the fact that Americans don't have enough money to pay their bills, which is why credit cards at the historical high of 1.4 trillion? Do you think maybe that should have been just maybe not brought up? And I guess that gets back to the fact that I believe that Biden's not running the White House on a daily basis, but that his surrogates, colleagues, whatever you want to call them, are making these decisions, and his cognitive abilities are clouded to the point where he signs off, maybe not fully being cogent as to what that decision implies to average American people like us.
Fair point. I must say I haven't researched into the effects of gas stoves and what the federal energy and environmental agencies have, the research they've released into the gas stove issue. I know there's been significant debate over that. I'm open to being convinced one way or the other, but I didn't prepare for that specific issue. And I'm happy to come back to discuss that issue if at some other point if Davin would host us to allow me to look into the data regarding gas stoves. So far I've heard compelling arguments on both sides to that issue, but as far as energy and investments into energy, I think there have been significant benefits domestically under the Biden administration. I mean, you can look directly at the Inflation Reduction Act, which has put tremendous investment into clean energy, allowing our production of clean energy in this country to be furthered, to be more competitive on the global stage. And much of that funding is offset in significant would result in significant savings for the federal government and our deficit through increasing minimum taxes on large corporations, excise taxes on stock buybacks, and increasing funding to the IRS to further enforce people cheating on their taxes and make sure that we're collecting people who are evading our current tax laws and bringing more income in that way. Those things will allow many of our investments, not only into clean energy, but into healthcare, to actually result in a net savings on our yearly government deficit.
I don't want to step on Noah's response. Is he done?
Yeah, no, I was just wrapping up by saying that I noticed you had a reaction to my comments on the IRS, and as someone who believes everyone in this room, including you, our moderator, and me, are honest Americans who pay the taxes required of us, why we would want others to cheat on their taxes at our expense when the IRS it does not have the ability to enforce our current laws on the books, which further funding for them under the Biden administration will allow them to at least go after some of the cheaters to allow them to reduce other people cheating at our expense.
One of the beautiful things of youth is you don't have a lot of years to experience is some of the bad things that three-letter agencies in the government does to people. And I can tell you that I have been the recipient of IRS aggressive audits when I paid all my taxes, but they wanted more. And it's not so much that they come at you. What you have to realize, Noah, is then you have to, or I had to, or you will one day maybe have to, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars hiring forensic experts and IRS tax attorneys to fight the IRS. They are not the benign, benevolent dictators you think they are. They are mean-spirited with guns, and they break into your offices, and they are not great people, and they don't have your best interests at heart. I understand if I forget to do a 1099, and that's one thing, but when they come in and they go through and intimidate you, your employees, and your family, that's a different thing. So I think most Americans that are hardworking and independent contractors like myself don't want $80 billion for the IRS so they can further strong arm honest Americans that try to comply, hard comply, and if they miss something are then subject to criminal prosecution. That's not the way our founding fathers wanted this country to go. And I think it's sad that the IRS has that power. They're not a law enforcement agency, they are a tax enforcement agency. And so I totally disagree with your assessment that the IRS is this good, benevolent, benign, benevolent agency of the government that says, oh, please, we just want to get your fair share of taxes. That has not been experienced. Having said that, I want to just pivot to one additional area, and this has to do with kind of a domestic policy, and it has to do with the EPA. And you talked a little bit about electric vehicles, and I want to ask you about Joe Biden's wants his mandate to go electric by 2040 or 75% by 2040. And I just want to point out to you and ask you this question. Most of the material that we need for these electric batteries come from China, or a large amount of them, our adversary. And the average rate, and I'm a guy that has or had two electric vehicles. I sold one because it's just we're not ready for that. We don't have enough charging stations. They don't work. And furthermore, the cost of an electric vehicle is significantly higher than a combustible engine. Although I would love to have everything electric, I don't think our country is ready for it, number one. The country that provides raw materials in many aspects is adversarial to us, and we haven't even begun to discuss how we dispose of these toxic batteries once they're done. We have no plan for that. I mean, you think tires are bad, but what about the batteries? And finally, disposing of batteries, what are we going to do? Where are we going to put them? Are we going to recycle the toxic material? There's no plan in place. So I just would like to ask you honestly, as an American, I love EV, but we're not ready. And until we get the infrastructure, and until we get a recycling plan in place for this toxic material, and maybe until we don't import the material from China that hates us or wants to invade Taiwan, don't you think that the administration is misguided in this regard? The push for EV at such a manner. And by the way, the American people don't like it. The demand for electric vehicles has dropped. Ford has cut back and lost $4 billion. I mean, do you drive an electric vehicle?
I do, yes.
So do I, but I'm not ready. Do you think that America is ready for this, given the variables I just pointed out?
At this very second, no. But I don't think the Biden administration's plan is full electric vehicles, full green energy by today or any time in the near future. I think this is a plan that's going to span over a number of decades with goals to move in the direction of more green energy, for electric vehicles, also for home living, and many of our other industries as well. I think this is a slow process that takes significant investment, which the Biden administration has started to do under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and other things towards moving in that direction. And it's a slow process. It can't happen today. It can't happen next year. It can't happen the next 4 years. But we need to start investing in these issues now to be prepared in the future to be to the leaders in the world in green energy. And that includes many decades down the road, pushing our country's driving towards electric vehicles, which in a decade from now will be significantly higher powered, more efficient batteries, more charging stations, more range in the batteries. So I have no doubt that over a long period of time that we will have the technology to achieve that. And that starts by investing now, and which is what the Biden administration is doing.
Well, why should the Biden administration invest in EVs? Elon Musk didn't ask the federal government for money, although he did get tax credits, which they didn't agree with. Shouldn't this be up to private enterprise and private capitalism? I mean, what the heck is the federal government doing this? And by the way, clean energy is 3 times, if not more expensive than natural gas, coal, which is a high polluter, I get it, and oil. So why are we forcing this on Americans and making them pay more for clean energy when we can't afford it, particularly given the inflation under the Biden administration and the lack of wage growth given that? I just don't understand that. And you didn't address the question as to the China issue, where we're getting these from an adversarial government. China is not our friend, and we know that. Well, and you didn't address the question as to what about the toxic battery waste? What are we going to do with that? I guess what I'm asking you, should we take a step back, and when all the automakers are saying no, and it's not just in America, it's throughout South America and even China and Asia and Europe, we don't have the infrastructure. Maybe we should take a step back, but the Biden administration is definitely had a mandate, I think by 2040 or 2050, to be like 35 or 60% all EV. I don't see how that benefits the very people that you say Joe Biden and his administration care so much about.
Fair point. We are China is not our friend. The leading political party in China and their leader, they're bad. They clearly want to do bad things, such as taking away Taiwan's independence. But I think we can't just have a clean cut from China economically. A long time ago, long before Biden, long before Trump, Democrat and Republican administrations alike, and economic planners made the decision that we were going to be a more service-based economy and requiring us to rely on China to some extent. And I think we will continue to rely on them to some extent to allow our economy to stay stable. But the Biden administration has done things to move our dependence away from China. For example, this past year was the first time in many decades that China was not the country that we imported the most from. We actually imported more from Mexico than from China. And that did not happen under the previous administration. Further, other investment by Biden, such as the CHIPS Act, allows us to bring back a lot of manufacturing into this country, which many people thought couldn't have been done. The previous administration claimed they could do it. They didn't. This administration did. $52 billion to bolster U.S. semiconductor manufacturing. That takes away some power from China. We continue to find alternative sources to support our largely service economy in the United States by looking to other countries other than China. So I do think the Biden administration is finding ways to lower our reliance on China in ways that haven't been done by recent administrations. So that would be what I would respond to your China question. And then remind me what your other issue was. Batteries. Yes. I agree that lithium-ion batteries are not, there's issues with their impact on the environment, how we dispose of them. My understanding is much of the investment into clean energy is also is to go into finding efficient ways to deal with used up batteries and how to deal with them efficiently. That's definitely research that needs to be continued, and that the government should support.
Well, I agree with you. The CHIP Act, which was a very much bipartisan bill, I believe it was promulgated by the Republicans, and the Democrats saw the value in that. That was the best thing we could have done, because in the past, China required 51% ownership in American companies and their technology, which was absolutely foolhardy. So we do agree, and we share that common ground. I don't know of any of the amounts. I don't know of any money in Biden's Inflation Reduction Act that went into recycling any of the batteries with a lithium-ion battery. So I'm not aware of that. So I can't comment. I do a lot of time on the internet and news channels. I don't know of any aspect of that, and that's got to be a problem that we have to address. The last thing I want to ask you about is I want to ask you this question because obviously I'm pro-Trump and you're pro-Biden. Is there anything that you saw Trump do in his 4 years that you thought was positive for this country? Natural energy production, natural gas production, export, decreased inflation, job growth. Did you find any redeeming quality of Trump at all? Or can you say unequivocally, Noah, that there's just nothing that you think he did that was good?
Well, I don't know if the moderator wants this to be a question in the next segment, or if I should answer now. What are your thoughts?
I was gonna ask this at the end. What do you like? One of the questions, the very last question is, give me one genuinely good thing you think, like good policy you think the opposing candidate has. So we'll shelve it for that, I guess.
Well, why don't we go to that point now? Are we good to go?
Well, you're asking him about Trump, and we're not even talking about Trump yet.
Okay, well, let's wrap. Let's talk about Trump then, because it's already 8.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was gonna start.
Fair point.
Yeah, I was letting you guys finish the back
Yeah.
and forth, and we'll go to Trump. So, we're gonna do closing arguments. So since Noah started, Dad, you start for the closing arguments. How do you feel about Biden? You got 2 minutes. Go.
Okay. All right. Well, I think Joe Biden suffers from Parkinson's and senile dementia. I think I'll be vindicated after he's not a president anymore. I think his cognitive abilities are so diminished that even members of the Democratic Party do not feel that he is fit for 4 more years. And I think that, say, 76% of Americans, both Democrat, Republicans, and independents, feel that he is not fit to be president. I also feel that it's not him running the White House. I think Jill Biden protects him, and I think many of his surrogates make the decisions for him. Having said that, I think that Joe Biden has never been good in foreign policy, and he's never been good in economics, and he is the consummate Democratic politician that started as a senator and never did good in law school, and is not a very bright guy to begin with. I don't dislike him, but I just don't think he deserves the mantle of President of the United States. And so I think on that, he needs to be defeated by President Trump, and I don't believe that Joe Biden has the ability to move this country forward economically, socially, and protect this country. And my biggest fear is that another 9/11 will happen under his watch.
Okay, Noah, take us home.
Okay, so I think the back and forth speaks for itself. I think the Biden administration has been incredibly successful internationally, has been the leaders of the international order in opposing Russia, supporting Ukraine, weakening one of our greatest adversaries. I think our economic policy has allowed us to move away from reliance on China. As you can see, that China is no longer our number one country that we import from. I think domestically, there has been a litany of successful legislation under the Biden administration. The Inflation Reduction Act, as we've talked about many times, one point I don't think I've made yet is that it caps prescription drug costs at certain prices. For example, insulin at $35 a month, which is a significant change from insulin price, the potential limits of insulin prices prior to the Inflation Reduction Act. As far as infrastructure, we've invested over $1 billion in infrastructure under the Biden administration, resulting in significant funds for roads, bridges, water pipes, trains, and importantly, high-speed internet and broadband for areas of the country that historically haven't had access to reliable internet, which is more and more an important part of living in today's world. The CHIPS Act, which what is true was bipartisan, the Biden administration supported that and signed off on that, bolstering U.S. manufacturing. We've passed laws on gun safety, targeting illegally acquired guns, and therefore Biden should be reelected. Thank you.
Okay.